The rain that day wasn't the soft, gentle drizzle that paints the world in a fresh coat of renewal. No, it was something far crueler. The kind of rain that pounds relentlessly against windows, each drop like a tiny, sharp needle piercing the air with a coldness that seems to seep into your very soul. It wasn't the kind of rain that invites comfort. It was the kind that makes you feel exposed, drenched, as if the world itself has decided you're not worth protecting. And looking back now, I realize just how fitting that weather was for what was about to unfold. My name is Emily, and at 22, I thought I had it all figured out. I had my life mapped out in neat little boxes: graduate, become a doctor, live my dream. There was no room for anything else. Or so I thought. But sometimes, life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you, and nothing makes sense anymore. You find yourself standing in the middle of the storm, drenched, exposed, not knowing how you got there or how to get back. It all started with a single decision. A decision that turned my world upside down and changed everything. Are you really keeping it? My mother's voice cracked like a whip, sharp and accusing. The words cut through the air, leaving a trail of tension thick enough to suffocate. The pregnancy test lay between us on the kitchen counter, an unspoken bomb, ticking down to the inevitable explosion. The weight of her disbelief hung heavy in the room as she took a step back, her face twisted in a mixture of horror and disappointment. What about medical school? She demanded, as if the mere thought of motherhood was enough to derail everything I'd worked for. What about your future? I can do both, I said, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach, still flat but already filled with a life that would soon change everything. Other women manage it. My dad, who had been silent up until now, slammed his coffee mug down so forcefully that it rattled the dishes on the counter. The noise echoed in the small kitchen, a cruel reminder of how far apart we had already become. Other women have husbands, Emily, he spat. Where's the father? I froze. The words felt like a slap, sharp and stinging. I could feel the truth of his accusation settle deep within me. He's not in the picture, I said quietly, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. And he won't be. A bitter laugh escaped my mother's lips, hollow and full of scorn. Won't be, she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. Of course he won't be, because you won't tell us who he is. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. For all their concern, they couldn't see the truth. The father was gone, and the last thing I needed was their judgment on top of everything else. My father's eyes were like daggers. For all we know, you don't even know who he is, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. Don't, I said, sharper than I intended. Don't finish that sentence. The silence that followed was suffocating, the tension hanging between us like a thick, unspoken truth. This isn't how we raised you, my father said finally, his voice trembling with anger as he paced the kitchen floor. This isn't what we sacrificed everything for. Coming to this country, working ourselves to the bone, just so you could throw it all away. I wanted to scream at him that I wasn't throwing anything away. I wasn't throwing my dreams away. But I couldn't find the words. All I could do was stand there, frozen, my heart breaking a little more with every word they spoke. I'm not throwing anything away, I insisted, my voice quiet but firm. I can still be a doctor. I can still make this work. But my mother cut me off, her voice cold and final. You can't. Not like this. Not alone. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched their faces, faces I had known and loved my entire life, change before my eyes. What had once been filled with warmth and affection was now twisted into something unrecognizable. Disappointment. Disgust. Their masks of anger and resentment were fully in place now, and they stared at me as though I were a stranger. As though I were the one who had betrayed them. There's a solution, my father said finally, his voice low and calculating. A simple one. Then you can continue with your life as planned. I knew exactly what he meant. The pressure to choose. The easy way out. The way they wanted me to go. But my hand pressed harder against my stomach, as if I could protect the life growing inside me from their cold judgment. No, I said firmly. No, I won't. My father's face hardened, his jaw clenched. Then you leave us no choice, he said. If you insist on ruining your life, you won't do it under our roof. You won't do it with our support. The words hit me like a blow. You're throwing me out? The question left my mouth before I could stop it, but even as I said it, I knew it was true. You're choosing to leave, my father corrected, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. By choosing this mistake over your family. And that was it. The moment everything I had known and loved, everything I thought was safe, slipped through my fingers like water. 8 years later, I still remember every detail of that day. The way the rain pounded against the windows, as if the world itself was crying with me. The smell of my father's coffee growing cold on the counter. The sound of my own footsteps as I packed what little I could carry, each step louder than the last, as though I were walking toward my own future and away from everything I had ever known. I still remember the hollow ache in my chest when I walked out of that house, knowing that I was leaving my family behind, not out of choice, but because I had no other option. My friend Penelope took me in that first night. She was already a single mother herself, struggling but surviving. I cried in her arms, unsure of where I was going or how I would survive. They'll come around, she whispered, stroking my hair. Once they meet their grandchild, they'll change their minds. But they didn't. They didn't change. And I had no choice but to keep going. To keep living. To keep proving to myself that I could do this on my own. The tension in the room was suffocating, like the air had thickened with the weight of our unspoken words. My mother stood in front of me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to contain her growing fury. My father was pacing back and forth, his brow furrowed with an anger so intense I could feel it seeping into every corner of the kitchen. I knew, deep down, that this moment would change everything. There was no turning back. Emily, how could you do this to us? My mother's voice cracked like glass, each word coming out sharp and accusing. How could you throw your future away for something so irresponsible? Her eyes were wide, but it wasn't shock that I saw, it was betrayal. Betrayal in its purest form. As if I had personally stabbed her in the back, crushed every hope and dream she had for me. I'm not throwing my future away, I replied, my voice trembling but steady. I'm making a choice I have the right to make. I'm choosing to keep my baby. I could feel the words hanging in the air, each syllable like a weight pressing down on us. You don't understand what this will do to you, my father snapped, his voice rising with each step he took. Do you know how hard we worked to get you into medical school? Do you know what sacrifices we made? He turned to my mother for support, but her eyes never left me. The words burned as they came out of his mouth, like molten lava. You're throwing away everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed. For what? A mistake? I flinched. I knew they didn't understand. They couldn't. How could they? My whole life, I had tried to be the perfect daughter, to meet every expectation they set for me. And now, I was failing. In their eyes, this was the ultimate betrayal, the moment their vision for me crumbled into dust. Other women do it, I said, my voice rising with a sudden surge of anger. Other women manage to build careers and raise families. Why can't I? Dad's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight with frustration. Because those women have husbands, Emily. They have support. Where's the father of your child? His voice was low now, almost mocking. Where's the man who's going to stand beside you? Huh? I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body flaring with the sting of shame. I could feel my hands shaking, but I couldn't let them see it. I couldn't let them win. He's not in the picture, I said quietly. And he won't be. And I don't need him to be. My mother scoffed, her laugh hollow and bitter. Of course he won't be, she muttered. Because you won't tell us who he is. For all we know, you don't even know. Don't, I said sharply, my voice cutting through the tension. Don't finish that sentence. This is my choice. My life. I don't owe you an explanation about who he is or why he's not here. The words felt like a declaration, like a shield rising between me and them. This isn't how we raised you, my father said, his voice bitter with disbelief. We didn't come here, work ourselves to the bone, just for you to throw it all away. We didn't sacrifice everything so you could ruin your life. I felt the anger boiling inside me, threatening to spill over. I'm not ruining my life, I said through clenched teeth. I'm making it my own. But my mother, whose face had twisted with disgust, cut in again, her voice cold. You can't do this alone. Not like this. Not without help. Help? I repeated, incredulous. I don't need your help. I don't need your approval either. The silence that followed was deafening. My chest was tight, my heart pounding in my ears. Every fiber of my being screamed to fight back, to make them understand, but I couldn't. Their eyes, once filled with love and warmth, now held nothing but judgment. They couldn't see me. Not really. Not anymore. You leave me no choice, Emily, my father said finally, his voice like ice. If you choose this path, you do it without us. You do it without our support. And you do it, outside of our home. It was like a slap to the face. The final blow. A decision made in an instant, but one that would echo through my entire life. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't process what was happening. I couldn't understand how, after all we had been through, after all the sacrifices they had made for me to have this opportunity, they were abandoning me. You're throwing me out? I asked, my voice small, almost desperate. You're choosing to leave, my father corrected, his voice hardening. By choosing this mistake over your family. You leave us no choice. I stood there, frozen, as the full weight of his words crashed down on me. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath shallow and uneven. I wanted to scream, to rage against them for everything they had done, for everything they had taken from me, but instead, I simply turned and walked out of the room. I couldn't look at them anymore. I couldn't stay. And as I packed my things, I could hear the rain still pouring outside, as if the world itself was mourning for what had just been lost. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, each step heavier than the last as I packed the few belongings I could carry. The weight of my suitcase felt like the weight of the world. It wasn't just clothes or books I was taking. It was everything I had ever known. The life I thought I would have, the future I had carefully planned out, gone in an instant. It felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind, a part of me I had tried so hard to hold on to. But as I walked out of that house, the rain outside seemed to echo the turmoil inside me, its relentless rhythm offering no comfort. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay in a place that had become so foreign, so hostile. The faces I had once trusted now looked at me like a stranger, and the love I had once counted on had turned into something cold, something unrecognizable. The door clicked shut behind me, and I took one last look at the house that had been home for so many years. The windows were dark, and I knew my parents were watching from the other side. They had made their choice. And now, I had to make mine. I didn't know where to turn, but I didn't have the luxury of time to figure it out. I had to keep moving. I had to keep living. And then I thought of Penelope. Penelope had been my friend since the beginning of medical school, a constant source of strength. She knew what it was like to be a mother, to fight for your child and your future without anyone by your side. Penelope had her own battles, but she had always been there for me, even when I didn't know how to ask for help. And now, I needed her more than ever. I called her from a payphone on the street corner, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. The phone rang only once before she picked up. Emily? Her voice was soft, full of concern. What's wrong? I need somewhere to stay, I whispered, the weight of my words settling like a stone in my stomach. I don't have anywhere else to go. There was a long pause, and then Penelope's voice came back, firm and reassuring. Come to my place. You and the baby are welcome here. I'll take care of you. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my suitcase and walked toward the bus station, the world still a blur around me. Penelope's offer was a lifeline, and I wasn't going to waste it. When I arrived at her apartment later that evening, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and physically numb. Penelope opened the door with a soft smile, her arms wide as she pulled me into a tight hug. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She simply held me, and for the first time since I had left my parents' house, I felt like I was safe. I'm so sorry, Em, Penelope whispered, pulling back to look at me. You didn't deserve any of this. I shook my head, forcing a weak smile. I don't know what happened. I thought they would understand. I thought they would accept me. Penelope didn't say anything for a moment. She just sat down beside me on the couch, her hand resting on mine. They don't get it. They don't understand what it's like to be in your shoes. But you're not alone, okay? You've got me, and we're going to get through this. You're going to get through this. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. Not until I had to. The next few days passed in a haze of exhaustion and quiet, late-night conversations with Penelope. She had a son of her own, and though she was struggling financially, she never made me feel like I was a burden. She worked long hours at a diner, and I spent my days applying for part-time jobs and trying to stay focused on my studies. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of everything felt too much to bear, when I doubted my ability to keep going. But every time I looked at Penelope, I remembered why I had to keep fighting. The hardest part was knowing that my parents had turned their backs on me. They didn't understand. They didn't even try. I sent them pictures of my ultrasound, updates on my progress, even a letter telling them I had made the decision to raise my child on my own. But every attempt to reach out was met with silence. My parents had made their choice, and I had made mine. I didn't know if they would ever come around, and part of me didn't care anymore. But I also couldn't help but wonder, with each passing day, if they were really as certain about their decision as they seemed. Was their pride really more important than their daughter's happiness? Time passed. Slowly, but surely, I started to rebuild. I finished my medical courses, juggling sleepless nights with part-time jobs. Penelope was there every step of the way, helping me when I needed it, cheering me on when I felt like I couldn't take another step. And then Walker was born. I still remember the first time I held him in my arms. His tiny hand wrapped around my finger, his little face scrunched up as he let out a soft cry. In that moment, I felt like I had everything I needed. I didn't need my parents' approval. I didn't need their judgment. I had him. I had this beautiful little boy who would never know the sting of rejection. I would protect him. I would give him everything I didn't have. As I watched Walker grow, taking his first steps, saying his first words, I couldn't help but wonder if my parents would ever see the person I had become. If they would ever realize that I was strong enough to handle this, that I didn't need them anymore. But I didn't know. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. I didn't need them anymore. But I would never forget the lesson they taught me. The lesson that family isn't always the ones you're born into. Sometimes, it's the people you choose to stand by you. And right now, Penelope was that person. She was my family. She was my strength. And together, we would survive. The day Walker was born, I could hardly believe it. It was early morning, the kind of stillness that comes before the world fully wakes, when everything feels suspended in time. My contractions came fast, and the pain was sharp, but in those moments, I was consumed by something deeper than discomfort. I was consumed by the sheer miracle of what was happening. Every breath, every push, was leading me to this moment, this little person who would change my world in ways I couldn't yet imagine. When he finally arrived, I barely had time to process the rush of emotions before they placed him in my arms. His tiny hand curled around my finger, and the world outside the sterile hospital room disappeared. He was perfect. His skin was soft and warm, his eyes blinking open in the bright light of the room. I hadn't even realized how much I needed him until that moment. And in an instant, all the doubts, the fears, the uncertainties vanished. I was a mother, and nothing else mattered. But as I looked down at my baby boy, I couldn't escape the thought that my parents, my family, weren't here. They hadn't seen me through this. They weren't here to welcome him into the world. They weren't here to share in the joy of this new life. And for a long time, I wondered if they ever would be. In the weeks that followed, my life was consumed by the rhythm of caring for Walker. Sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant hum of exhaustion that followed me throughout the day. But there were moments, small but beautiful, when the chaos seemed to quiet, and I would just stare at him. I would watch his tiny hands reach for me, his soft breaths as he slept, and I knew, truly knew, that I was doing the right thing. I didn't need anyone else. I had him, and that was enough. But there was still so much more I needed to do. I had promised myself I would finish medical school, no matter what. And even though every day felt like an uphill battle, I kept going. I studied late into the night after Walker fell asleep, using every spare moment to read textbooks, practice notes, and prepare for exams. I took on part-time jobs whenever I could, trying to make ends meet, but it was always a struggle. The weight of everything, being a mother, being a student, being on my own, was heavy. There were nights when I wanted to collapse into bed and never get up. But I couldn't. Not when I had Walker to care for. Not when I had a dream to chase. Penelope was my rock through all of it. She helped me when Walker had a fever, she stayed up with me to study for finals, and when I was on the verge of giving up, she was there, reminding me that I was stronger than I realized. "You can do this, Emily. You're doing it already," she would tell me, and somehow, her words made it all seem possible. Graduation day came faster than I expected. The day I had dreamed of for so long was finally here, and as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I couldn't help but feel a rush of emotions. This was it. I had done it. Against all odds, against every challenge life had thrown my way, I had finished what I started. But even as I stood there, holding that diploma in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still doing it alone. My parents weren't there. They weren't there to see me achieve the thing I had worked so hard for. But as I scanned the audience, my eyes found Penelope and Walker sitting together in the front row. Penelope waved, a huge smile on her face, while Walker bounced in his seat, his excitement palpable. And in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't alone. I had a family. A family of my own. And they were the ones who had been there for me through everything, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the struggle. They were the ones who saw me, who believed in me when I could barely believe in myself. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I had Walker, and I had Penelope. I had built a life for myself, and it was more than I had ever hoped for. As I walked off the stage, holding my diploma in one hand and Walker's little hand in the other, I knew that this was just the beginning. Everything I had been through had brought me to this moment, and there was so much more to come. It was a day like any other, or so I thought. The kind of day that blended into the haze of routine, early morning with Walker, getting him ready for school, packing my bag for work, checking the bills, always the bills. But somehow, amidst all the chaos, a small slip of paper caught my attention. It was crumpled at the bottom of my purse, a lottery ticket I had bought on a whim months ago. I almost threw it away without thinking, but something made me pause. Maybe it was just the exhaustion of everything, or maybe I was simply tired of feeling powerless. Whatever it was, I unfolded the ticket and glanced at the numbers. I don't know what I expected, but it certainly wasn't what I saw. The numbers on the ticket matched the ones on my phone screen, blinking back at me in disbelief. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was in front of me, but it didn't make sense. The ticket, the numbers, it couldn't be real. Could it? I checked again. And again. I was trembling now, my hands shaking so badly I had to sit down. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't breathe. The number was too big, too ridiculous. $47 million. I wanted to scream. To laugh. To cry. My mind was in overdrive, and nothing made sense anymore. How could this happen to me? To us? After everything, after all the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the impossible choices, this couldn't be real. I couldn't sit still. My legs carried me to the kitchen, where I stood frozen, staring at the phone in my hand. My pulse was racing. Walker's voice broke through my panic. "Mommy, look." I drew a picture. His voice was full of excitement, innocent and sweet. He held up a picture of two stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small. Us. His drawing. My heart twisted in my chest. I smiled, though my insides were still in turmoil. "It's beautiful, baby," I said, pinning it to the fridge, trying to act normal, trying to push the overwhelming weight of what I had just discovered into the background. But I couldn't. Not when the world had just changed in the span of a single second. I told myself I wasn't going to make a big deal out of it. I'd check with the lottery office, confirm the win, and then think it through. But as I stood there, staring at the ticket again, the reality began to settle in. We had enough now. Enough to finally breathe. Enough to stop fighting for every penny. I wouldn't have to worry about the bills anymore. I could pay off every loan, buy a house, real dreams, not just the constant struggle of making it through another day. But then, something else hit me. Something deeper, darker. The thought of my parents. The very people who had cast me out. Would they come back now? Would they see the money and think it was their chance to redeem themselves? I couldn't stop the wave of resentment that washed over me. The hurt, the anger that they could think of me as nothing more than an investment. I was worth more than their pride. My child was worth more than their judgment. I tried to shake the thoughts away. This was supposed to be a new beginning. But I couldn't deny it. This win, this money, it wasn't just a ticket to a new life. It was a ticket to confrontation. Walker pulled up my sleeve again, his voice full of innocent curiosity. "Mommy, are we rich now?" I looked down at him, trying to mask the storm inside me. He was so young, so full of joy, and he deserved so much more than this tangled mess of emotions I had to sort through. I pulled him into my lap, my hand still shaking as I hugged him tight. "I don't know yet, sweetie," I whispered. "But we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay." I had no idea what would happen next. But in that moment, I realized one thing for sure, whatever came, we would face it together. Walker and me, against the world. And I wasn't going to let anything, anyone, take that away from us. I still didn't know how I would navigate the new reality of what I had just discovered. The money was real, but it was also a reminder of everything I had fought for, and everything I had lost. It was a blessing, yes, but it was also a test. Would I use this windfall to build the life I had always dreamed of, or would it pull me into the same cycle of manipulation and control I had fought so hard to escape? The phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was the lottery office. My heart skipped again as I answered. "Ma'am, we've confirmed that your ticket is a winner," the voice on the other end said calmly, almost too calmly. "You've won $47 million. I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank for a moment. But there it was. Real. This was happening. And with it, everything was about to change. The world had just handed me a chance, a choice. It was time to decide what kind of life I wanted. What kind of future I would build for Walker. And if I was being honest with myself, I knew exactly what I had to do. But before I could make a decision, I needed to take a deep breath. I needed time. Time to figure out who I was now. Time to figure out how to make the right choices. But one thing was certain, this was only the beginning. And nothing would ever be the same again. The first call came a few days after the lottery win, but I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me I should. When I picked up, the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. "Emily? Sweetheart, it's your mother." For a moment, I thought my heart stopped beating. Her voice sounded almost familiar, but distant, like it had been stripped of all warmth, all affection. It was the voice of someone trying to mask their guilt. I couldn't help but wonder what brought her to call after 8 long years. 8 years of silence, of unanswered letters, of missed birthdays and holidays. 8 years of pretending I didn't exist. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, though I fought to keep it steady. "What do you want?" There was a long pause, and then her voice softened, but I could hear the desperation beneath her words. "We saw you on the news, darling. We saw what happened with the lottery. We've been thinking about you, about Walker. We miss you both so much." My stomach churned. The words she spoke felt like a twisted attempt to rewrite history, to make it seem like they hadn't abandoned me when I needed them the most. I fought to hold back the anger rising in my chest. "You miss us now?" I asked, my voice growing sharp. "After everything? After how you kicked me out, how you refused to even acknowledge me?" She didn't respond right away, and when she did, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "We were wrong, Emily. We know that now. We've changed. Your father and I, we want to make things right. We want to meet Walker. We want to make up for the lost time." The words felt like a slap. How could they even say that? How could they pretend that everything was fine now, just because I had money? It was as if the years of pain, the years of silence, meant nothing. I looked down at Walker, who was sitting next to me, playing with his toys, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. The thought of him never knowing the grandparents I once dreamed he would have, dreams I once shared with them, stung. They didn't deserve to be part of his life. They didn't deserve a second chance to manipulate us. Not after everything. I felt a knot in my stomach as my mother's voice came through the phone again, this time more urgent. "Please, Emily, we want to see you both. We can fix this. We can be a family again. Let us help you. You don't have to do this alone." The words twisted in my chest. "I'm not alone," I said, the bitterness in my tone unmistakable. "I've never been alone. I have Walker, and I have Penelope. They are the ones who've been there for me. Not you. Not after everything you put me through." I heard her gasp on the other end of the line. "We were scared," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "We didn't know how to handle it. We thought we were protecting you. But we see now that we were wrong. We want to make it right, Emily. We want to be part of your life. Your son's life." I felt the anger rise in me, a wave that I struggled to keep under control. They didn't get it. They couldn't possibly understand. What did they think? That a check from the lottery would suddenly erase the years of hurt and rejection? That a few words of apology could undo everything? "No," I said firmly, my voice steady now, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I don't need you to make things right. I've already made my life. And Walker is better off without you." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. My mother didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. When she finally did, her voice was quieter, more tentative. "Please, sweetheart, just think about it. We want to meet him. We want to be a family again." I hung up the phone before I could say anything else. I couldn't bear to hear another word. They didn't deserve me. They didn't deserve to be in my life, in Walker's life. Not like this. Not now, after all the damage they had caused. But as I stared at my phone, the weight of it all settled in. They hadn't changed. They wouldn't change. And deep down, I knew it. They were only interested in my money, in getting back into my life, because I could offer them something they wanted. that much was clear. But the worst part? I had let them back in for a moment. I had let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had truly changed. But now, I had to let it go. I had to protect Walker from them, from their manipulations. I turned to Penelope, who had been standing quietly by the door, listening. She didn't need to ask what happened. She could see the look on my face, the exhaustion in my eyes. "They called, didn't they?" she said softly, her voice filled with understanding. I nodded. "They think they can just waltz back in. They think everything's fine now. That I'll forgive them because of the money. But I'm not going to fall for it. Not again." Penelope walked over and sat beside me, placing her hand on mine. "You don't need them, Emily. You've already built your own family. A real family." I glanced at Walker, who was still lost in his game, and I realized Penelope was right. I had already built a family, one that didn't tear me down or abandon me when things got tough. One that stood by me, no matter what. I had everything I needed. And nothing would change that. But the call from my parents wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. They would keep coming, I knew that. They would keep trying to find a way back in. But I wasn't going to let them. I had the power now. I had control. And that power, that control, I was going to use it to protect the life I had built. The life I deserved. The days following my parents' call felt like a blur, a surreal mix of anger, disbelief, and the slow simmer of a plan forming in the back of my mind. Every time my phone rang with their number on the screen, I felt a knot tighten in my chest, but I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear their apologies or their empty promises. I had already decided. The truth was clear now, they weren't here because they loved me. They were here because of the money. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. They wanted me to believe they had changed, but I wasn't that naive anymore. I wasn't going to let them use me again. This time I would be in control. The idea came to me one night, as I sat alone in the small apartment I had worked so hard to make my own. Walker was asleep in his room, the soft sound of his breathing filling the silence. I looked around the space that had once felt like a cage, but now, it felt like my freedom. Everything I had done, everything I had fought for, had brought me here. And now, I had the means to make a statement. I didn't just want to move on from my past. I wanted to ensure that my parents knew what they had lost. I wanted them to regret every single day they had turned their backs on me. The thought of revenge didn't come from a place of bitterness, it came from a place of strength. A strength I had gained from the struggle. They had tried to break me, tried to make me feel like I wasn't enough. But I was. I had survived, and I had thrived. And now, with everything I had fought for at my fingertips, it was time to take back control. I called Penelope the next day. "I need your help," I said, my voice steady, though the fire burning inside me was unmistakable. "I knew this day would come," she said without hesitation. Penelope had been with me through every step of my journey, through the nights when I thought I couldn't keep going, through the moments when the world felt like it was falling apart. She had been my anchor, and now, she was ready to help me stand tall. "I'm going to set up a foundation," I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. "I want to use the money to help others, to do something good. But I want to make sure my parents see it. I want them to know that this life I've built, this success, is because of my choices, not theirs. And I want to use it to show them just how much they've lost." Penelope was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was filled with conviction. "I'll help you. We'll make it happen. You're not just going to show them who you are, you're going to show them who you've become." I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't about punishing them, it was about proving to myself that I was stronger than their judgment. It was about standing up for what I had built and for the family I had created. We started planning immediately. I called a financial advisor and set up a meeting to figure out how to structure the funds. I knew that, if I was going to do this, I had to make sure it was done right. This was my moment to take back control, not just for me, but for every person who had ever been told they couldn't make it on their own. Penelope and I spent hours discussing the logistics, everything from how to manage the funds to how to spread the word about the foundation. We would focus on supporting single mothers, giving them the resources they needed to succeed without judgment or shame. I could already see it in my mind, a network of strong, resilient women lifting each other up, breaking the cycle of shame that had haunted me for so long. But I didn't stop there. I also planned for the day when I would finally confront my parents. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they had lost. I was going to look them in the eyes and show them who I had become. And most importantly, I was going to do it without needing their approval. The meeting with my financial advisor was the next step in the plan. As we sat across from each other in his sleek, polished office, I felt the weight of everything I had built. This wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming my life. It was about standing tall in the face of all the pain my parents had caused me and showing them that I had succeeded, not because of them, but in spite of them. I want to make a statement with this money, I told the advisor, my voice firm. I want to use it to build something that will last. Something that will change lives. He nodded, understanding the weight of my words. We can set up a foundation. It'll be your legacy, Emily. Something you can be proud of. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just building a foundation, I was building my future. I was creating something that would outlast the hurt, something that would speak louder than any apology my parents could offer. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and late-night planning sessions with Penelope. The foundation began to take shape, and as it did, so did my sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And soon, I would show the world, and my parents, exactly what that meant. I could feel it coming. The moment when I would finally take control, when I would stand in front of my parents and show them everything they had missed. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about redemption. Redemption for me. For Walker. For all the women who had been told they weren't enough. The foundation would be my answer. It would be my legacy. And when they saw it, when they saw what I had built, they would understand. Not just the money, but the strength it had taken to get here. The restaurant was everything they loved, elegant, polished, the kind of place that made you feel small and insignificant, unless you had the money to belong. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off the white tablecloths, gleaming like some perfect illusion of wealth and status. My parents sat at the table, their smiles forced but eager, their eyes filled with that unmistakable glimmer of expectation. I could almost hear the unspoken words hanging between us, "We've come back for you. You're successful now. We want to be a part of your life again." But I wasn't the same person they had kicked out all those years ago. I was no longer the girl who had begged for their approval, the girl who had hoped they would see her worth. I had learned, painfully, that their love came with conditions, and those conditions were no longer enough to keep me tethered to them. When I walked in, the air in the room seemed to freeze. I could see my mother's eyes widen slightly, the corners of her mouth twitching in an attempt to mask her discomfort. My father looked up, his face tight with forced civility, but there was no warmth in his gaze. "Emily, darling, you look, well," my mother said, her voice syrupy sweet, as if trying to pretend everything between us could just be picked up where it left off. She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away before her fingers could make contact. "I'm doing well," I said calmly, my voice steady, though I could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface. "And you? How have you been?" My father cleared his throat, leaning forward slightly, his eyes narrowed. "We've been doing fine. We've been thinking about you a lot, Emily. About everything." He paused, glancing at my mother, before continuing. "We know we made mistakes. We know we pushed you away. But we want to make it right. We've been talking about it for months now." I let his words hang in the air for a moment, watching his eyes flicker with something close to guilt, though it didn't reach the surface. They wanted me to believe that their regrets were real, but I wasn't fooled. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about regaining control. They had seen my success, my new life, and they wanted a piece of it. They wanted back in. No, I said, my voice firm, the weight of my decision settling over me. You can't make it right. Not this time. My father stiffened. What do you mean by that? You think we don't deserve a second chance? After everything we've been through? I could feel my heart pounding, but I didn't flinch. You didn't deserve a second chance when you kicked me out. You didn't deserve a second chance when you abandoned me with no explanation, no support. And now, after all this time, after everything I've done to survive without you, you think a few apologies are enough to erase that? My mother's eyes flashed with something, hurt, anger, or perhaps just the frustration of being caught in her own web of lies. We were just trying to protect you, she said, her voice cracking. We thought we were doing what was best for you. We thought we could guide you. We didn't know what else to do. I shook my head slowly, feeling the years of frustration bubbling to the surface. You didn't protect me, you abandoned me. You thought I needed your guidance? I needed your support. I needed you to stand by me when everything fell apart. Instead, you turned your backs on me. Emily, we're your parents, my father said, his voice rising, the anger in his tone now unmistakable. We did what we thought was best. You can't just throw that all away. We sacrificed everything for you. I met his gaze head on, my heart steady, my words sharp. You didn't sacrifice everything for me. You sacrificed your own dignity to maintain control over me. And now you want to come back into my life, because of the money. Because you think I owe you something for your so-called sacrifices. Well, I don't. I don't owe you anything. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, neither of them spoke, as if the words I had just said had struck them silent. My mother's face was pale, her lips trembling with emotion, but there was no apology in her eyes. No remorse. Just the recognition that her plan was falling apart. Then, my father stood abruptly, slamming his hand down on the table, making the silverware clink. You ungrateful little, he was cut off by the waiter, who had arrived at the table with a bottle of wine, but I could see the anger in his face, the fury barely contained beneath his suit. Stop, I said, my voice cold but resolute. You want to know what I've been building? What I've been working for all these years? It's not just the money. It's everything you took from me. Everything you tried to destroy. It's the family I've built. And I'm not going to let you tear it down just because you want to be part of it now. The tension in the room was palpable. The waiter stepped back, sensing the rising conflict, and for a brief moment, I could hear the distant hum of conversation from other tables, as if the world outside had forgotten the small drama unfolding in this corner of the restaurant. You've made a mistake, Emily, my mother whispered, her voice trembling with what I could only describe as fear. You'll regret this. I leaned in slightly, my eyes cold and unwavering. No. The only mistake I made was thinking you would ever truly care about me. Not for who I am, but for who I've become. You've never wanted me. You've always wanted control. And now, you can't have it. My father's face turned red with fury, his hands shaking as he reached for his glass. He opened his mouth to say something, but I was already standing. I didn't need to hear any more. I had already made my point. I'm done, I said, my voice low but firm. Don't ever contact me again. You've already shown me who you really are. I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels against the polished floor echoing in the silence behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. They could stay in their world of illusions, pretending that their control still mattered. But for me? I was free. And nothing would ever change that. The days after the confrontation were a blur, a whirlwind of emotions that settled deep in my chest. I had stood up for myself, for the life I had built, and yet, there was still a lingering ache, a small, quiet part of me that couldn't shake the idea of my parents, sitting there, still trying to play their game. They thought their money, their manipulation, could just erase the years of hurt. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was someone else. Someone stronger. I didn't feel relief, not yet. But I did feel something stirring inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Freedom. A freedom that came not just from the weight of the lottery win, but from the truth I had embraced. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I had already won, without them. And in that moment, I finally understood what true redemption looked like. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about tearing them down, it was about me, standing up, and saying, "This is who I am. This is my life. And it's mine alone." I couldn't escape the thought of Walker, though. He had always been my light, my reason for pushing forward. I had built my life around him, and no matter what had happened between me and my parents, he deserved something more than their empty promises. I wanted him to understand that family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, about those who stood by you when everything fell apart. It was time to make a choice. And not just for me, but for him. I decided to take the next step, set my own terms. I called them. The call was brief. When I heard my mother's voice, there was no hesitation. I knew this was my chance to take back control, not just of my life, but of everything that came with it. "I think it's time we met," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm doing it on my terms, not yours. I want you to understand who I've become, who Walker has become. You're not going to control us, not anymore. You want to be part of our lives? Then prove it. And not with money, not with apologies. Prove it with your actions. That's the only way this is going to work." The silence on the other end of the phone was heavy, but I wasn't backing down. I had drawn the line, and I wasn't afraid to cross it. "I'll arrange a meeting," I said, the words more final than I'd expected. "But only when I'm ready." After the call, I sat in silence for a long while, reflecting on what had just happened. It wasn't an easy decision. I had spent years longing for my parents to come around, to offer me the love and support I had missed. But now, I was no longer looking for their approval. I didn't need it. In the days that followed, I focused on the foundation I had started, pouring my energy into it with a newfound sense of purpose. I worked with Penelope to fine-tune the programs, ensuring that we could make a real impact. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for all the women and families who had been told they weren't good enough, for all the mothers who had been left to fend for themselves. This was my legacy. And Walker? He was thriving. I watched him grow every day, learning from the world around him, so full of joy, so free. I could see it in the way he looked at me, trusting me completely, believing in the world I had created for him. He didn't need my parents. He had everything he needed right here, with me. But even as I built my own future, I knew I had to face them. The meeting with my parents was inevitable. And as much as I dreaded it, I knew it was time. They had tried to manipulate me with their money, their promises. But now, it was my turn to show them that I had control over my own life. I would no longer be the daughter they could mold into their perfect image. I would be the woman I had become, no more apologies, no more shame. The day arrived. The restaurant was different this time, less polished, less about appearances. I wanted it that way. I wanted them to see me for who I truly was, not the girl they had abandoned, but the woman who had built her life from the ground up. When they arrived, I could see the change in them. My father, always so controlled, seemed a little less certain. My mother, still trying to be the picture of grace, was quieter than usual. They knew they were on my turf now, and the balance had shifted. "I'm glad you agreed to meet," I said, my voice calm, but firm. "I needed to hear you say the words. But I also need to make one thing clear. I've built something here. Something real. And no amount of money will ever change the past, or the way I feel about it." My father's eyes narrowed. "Emily, you've always been stubborn," he said, his voice sharp, trying to maintain control. We only want what's best for you. I shook my head. You've never wanted what's best for me. You've only wanted to control me. I'm not that girl anymore. I'm not asking for your approval. And I'm not going to let you back into my life just because I'm successful now. The words were out before I could stop them, but they felt right. They were a declaration. I wasn't looking for reconciliation. Not anymore. I was looking for closure. For peace. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I'm sorry, Emily. We didn't know how to handle it. We didn't know how to help. I let out a slow breath, looking them both in the eye. I understand that you're sorry. But that doesn't change anything. We're not going back to what we were. We're not going back to that version of me, the one you tried to control. I've moved on. And I want you to understand that. For the sake of Walker, for the sake of both of us, I need you to let go. I need you to accept who I am now. The silence that followed was deafening. But this time I didn't look away. I stood tall, knowing that the hardest part was over. I had found my redemption, not in their eyes, but in my own. And I had finally reclaimed my life. The days after the meeting felt like a turning point, a quiet finality settling into my bones. I had said what needed to be said, faced the past with the kind of courage I hadn't known I had. My parents' attempt at regaining control had faltered in the face of my unwavering resolve. The door that they had once slammed shut on me was now locked tight, and I held the key. It wasn't a vindictive feeling that lingered, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. I didn't need their approval anymore. The life I had built, the foundation I had created, and most importantly, the love I had for Walker, these were the things that mattered. Everything else was just noise, echoes of a past that no longer had the power to define me. I spent my days working with Penelope, pushing the foundation forward, building something that would outlast the pain of the past. Every new project we launched, every family we helped, felt like a small victory, a piece of the puzzle coming together. This was my new purpose, not to seek forgiveness or validation from those who had abandoned me, but to stand tall and help others who had been cast aside in the same way I once had. But it wasn't just the foundation. It was everything. I watched Walker grow, his confidence blooming as he realized, in his own small way, that he was loved unconditionally. He had everything he needed right here, with me. We had our own little family now, a family built on trust, love, and strength. I remember one evening, after a long day of work, when Walker tugged at my sleeve. "Mom," he said, his voice full of excitement. "Can we get a dog?" I smiled, crouching down to meet his eyes. "What kind of dog do you want?" He grinned. "A big one. A protector. Just like you." It was in that moment, as I looked into his bright eyes, that I realized how far I had come. The little boy who had once been a symbol of my struggle was now a symbol of everything I had fought for. He was my future, my strength. And together, we were unstoppable. A few weeks later, we moved into a new house, a small, cozy place with a backyard big enough for Walker to run around in. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. It was a home. A real home. As I unpacked the last of the boxes, I felt the weight of everything lift, the final chapter of my past closing with a quiet click. This was the beginning of something new, something better. I knew I had to let go of the past, but it didn't mean forgetting. It meant making peace with it, accepting that some things couldn't be changed. And in doing so, I had set myself free. Walker ran into the living room, his face bright with excitement. "Look, Mom. I made a treehouse." He pointed outside, where a small wooden structure stood, half-built but already filled with the promise of adventure. I stepped outside with him, my heart swelling as I looked at the treehouse, his little hands working alongside Penelope's kids to create something together. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was that it was built with love, with the kind of community that had embraced us both. I watched as he climbed up into the treehouse, his laughter echoing through the yard, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep, undeniable sense of peace. This was what family was. Not the people who had abandoned me, not the ones who had tried to tear me down, but the ones who had lifted me up, who had helped me rebuild when everything seemed lost. And in that moment, I realized that this was my legacy, not the money, not the success, but the love and strength I had passed down to Walker. This was the life I had created, and nothing, not even my past, could take that away from me. As the sun set over our new home, I knew that everything had come full circle. My parents had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they had given me exactly what I needed: the strength to stand on my own, the courage to build something beautiful, and the wisdom to know that sometimes, the hardest journey leads to the most beautiful destinations. This was my new beginning. And I was ready.